Yep, I'm good at this. Oh, let me test audio before I do anything. Yeah, okay, I sound good. 1 second. I could iron out a lot of these problems if I just scheduled ahead, but my brain doesn't want me to. Hi, welcome to my stream. I'm Rachel. I don't normally say welcome to my stream, so that completely threw me off of my own, like, script. Hi, I'm Rachel. Welcome to my book club. Vampires are my special interest book club. Generally, I do lives, and we generally read from vampire anthologies that I've collected. We are currently in the middle of Dracula's Brood, smack in the middle. Actually a little bit past that. Awesome. Yeah, for this book club, we read mostly vampire short stories during lives because it's fun. I'm not a voice actor, so don't expect me to know how to pronounce French words or anything or add voices. Nobody wants me to do voices, trust me. I'm atrocious at them. Yeah, we read vampire short stories, and sometimes between books, I like to delve into literary journals because that is another pastime of mine. People don't seem to agree that it's fun based on the views, but I'm not going to stop because at the end of the day, my audience is me. Thank you for clicking into my live, and I hope you make it through for the rest of the ride. I didn't plan that sentence before I said it. That was a weird sentence. It is September. It is colder, but I'm not on a first floor. So it's still kind of warm in here on enough. I've settled for wearing very thick socks, but I also have a window fan on, and it's going to be on for the whole stream. If you can't stand the sound of a box fan, then this stream is not going to be for you. I'm sorry. Same with good voice acting. I don't have it in me. I'm also sorry about that. What else do I want to say? That's about what I say. If you're not so much into the lives, I have 2 longer form videos about full novels that I edited. If you'd like to check those out, they are there, and I am working on a 3rd, and I know I've been working on the 3rd for a while now, because I have been working on it for a while now, because I'm not very good at making long form videos, but it will be out eventually, about the Vicky Nelson, at least the first novel in this series. So look forward to that if you like those videos, and for now, we're going to read some short stories. Let's see. I usually do about a 2-hour stream. I'm trying to keep that more, like, it's a lot harder for my voice and also, like, my mental ability to focus. The longer it goes on, the harder it is for me to, like, say words properly and pay attention. So I try to keep it to 2 hours, which usually means about 3 stories. I'll try not to cross, 2 hours, yeah. I may have said 3. I try not to cross into 3, but I do occasionally. Hopefully not tonight, because I prefer mentally only doing about 2 hours. Didn't need to say that out loud, but I did. Yeah. Who cares? Only me. I don't need these anymore. And just in case, I should turn on. Yeah, priority only. Okay. The first story is the first 2 stories seem to be pretty short, actually. But the first one is The Vampire Maid by Hume Nisbet. I like to take this little thing off. It gets annoying. Hume Nisbet, 1849 to 1923. Each story starts with a blurb, which I think is pretty common for short stories. Anthologies. This person was another Austrian immigrant, originally born in Scotland, who enjoyed a vogue in late Victorian and Edwardian London. His most popular books were romantic adventures set in Australasia and the East Indies, usually illustrated by himself. I've never seen that collected into one phrase, Australia and I assume like Asia, East Asia. Never seen it written as Australasia. The following two stories were taken from his Christmas annual entitled Stories Weird and Wonderful. The fate of Dracula's other victims during his sojourn in England was never recorded, but the vampire Maid could easily have been one of them. It was the exact kind of abode that I had been looking for. I had been looking after for weeks, for I was in that condition of mind when absolute renunciation of society was a necessity. I had become diffident of myself and wearied of my kind. A strange unrest was in my blood, a barren dearth in my brains. Familiar objects and faces had grown distasteful to me. I wanted to be alone. This is the mood which comes upon every sensitive and artistic mind when the possessor has been overworked or living too long in one groove. It is nature's hint for him to speak pastures new, the sign that a retreat has become needful. If he does not yield, he breaks down and becomes whimsical and hypochondriacal, as well as hypercritical. It is always a bad sign when a man becomes overcritical and censorious about his own or other people's work, for it means that he is losing the vital portions of work, freshness, and enthusiasm. Before I arrived at the dismal stage of criticism, I hastily packed up my knapsack, and taking the train to Westmoreland, I began my tramp in search of solitude, bracing air, and romantic surroundings. Many places I came upon during that early summer wandering that appeared to have almost the required conditions, yet some petty drawback prevented me from deciding. Sometimes it was the scenery that I did not take kindly to. At other places, I took sudden antipathies to the lady or landlord, and I felt I would abhor him before a week was spent under their charge. Other places which might have suited me I could not have, as they did not want a lodger. Fate was driving me to this cottage on the moor, and no one can resist destiny. One day I found myself on a wide and pathless moor near the sea. I had slept the night before at a small hamlet, but that was already 8 miles in my rear, and since I had turned my back upon it, I had not seen any signs of humanity. I was alone with a fair sky above me, a balmy, ozone-filled wind blowing over the stony and heather-clad mounds, and nothing to disturb my meditations. How far the moor stretched, I had no knowledge. I only knew that by keeping in a straight line I would come to the ocean cliffs, then perhaps after a time arrive at some fishing village. I had provisions in my knapsack, and being young did not fear a night under the stars. I was in... Hold on. I forgot to move this keyboard so I can rest my hands better. Right. I had provisions in my knapsack, and being young did not fear a night under the stars. I was inhaling the delicious summer air, and once more getting back the vigor and happiness I had lost. My city-dried brains were again becoming juicy. Thus hour after hour slid past me with the paces, until I had covered about 15 miles since morning, when I saw before me in the distance a solitary stone-built cottage with roughly slatted roof. I'll camp there, if possible, I said to myself, as I quickened my steps towards it. To one in search of a quiet, free life, nothing could have possibly been more suitable than this cottage. It stood on the edge of lofty cliffs, with its front door facing the moor and the backyard wall overlooking the ocean. The sound of the dancing waves struck upon my ears like a lullaby as I drew near. How they would thunder when the autumn gales came on and the seabirds fled shrieking to the shelter of the seas. Of the sedges, my bad. What? I don't know what the sedges is, but that's where the seabirds flew, shrieking. A small garden spread out in front, surrounded by a dry stone wall just high enough for one to lean lazily upon, which inclined. This garden was a flame of color, scarlet predominating, with those other soft shades that cultivated poppies take on in their blooming, for this was all that the garden grew. As I approached, taking notice of the singular assortment of poppies and the orderly cleanness of the windows, the front door opened and a woman appeared who impressed me at once favorably as she leisurely came along the pathway to the gate and drew it back as if to welcome me. She was of middle age, and when young must have been remarkably good-looking. She was tall and still shapely, with smooth, clear skin, regular features, and a calm expression that at once gave me a sensation of rest. To my inquiries, she said that she could give me both a sitting and bedroom, and invited me inside to see them. As I looked at her smooth black hair and cool brown eyes, I felt that I would not be too particular about the accommodation. With such a landlady, I was sure to find what I was after here. The room surpassed my expectation, dainty white curtains and bedding with the perfume of lavender about them. A sitting room homely yet cozy without being crowded. With a sigh of infinite relief, I flung down my knapsack and clinched the bargain. She was a widow with one daughter whom I did not see the first day, as she was unwell and confined to her own room, but on the next day she was somewhat better, and then we met. The fare was simple, yet it suited me exactly for the time: delicious milk and butter with homemade scones, fresh eggs and bacon. After a hearty tea, I went early to bed in a condition of perfect content with my quarters. Yet happy and tired out as I was, I had by no means a comfortable night. This I put down to the strange bed. I slept certainly, but my sleep was filled with dreams, so that I woke late and unrefreshed. A good walk on the moor, however, restored me, and I returned with a fine appetite for breakfast. Certain conditions of mind, with aggravating circumstances, are required before even a young man can fall in love at first sight, as Shakespeare has shown in his Romeo and Juliet. In the city, where many fair faces passed me every hour, I had remained like a stoic. Yet no sooner did I enter the cottage after that morning walk than I succumbed instantly before the weird charms of my landlady's daughter, Adrienne Brunel. She was somewhat better this morning and able to meet me at breakfast, for we had our meals together while I was their lodger. Jesus. Adrienne was not beautiful in the strictly classical sense, her complexion being too lividly white, and her expression too set to be quite pleasant at first sight. Yet, as her mother had informed me, she had been ill for some time, which accounted for that defect. Her features were not regular. Her hair and eyes seemed too black, with that strangely white skin, and her lips too red for any except the decadent harmonies of an Aubrey Beardsley. I don't know what that means. Yet my fantastic dreams of the preceding night, with my morning walk, had prepared me to be enthralled by this modern, poster-like invalid. The loneliness of the moor, with the singing of the ocean, had gripped my heart with a wistful longing. The incongruity of those flaunting in evanescent poppy flowers, dashing their giddy tints in the face of that sober heath, touched me with a shiver as I approached the cottage, and lastly that weird embodiment of startling contrasts completed my subjugation. She rose from her chair as her mother introduced her, and smiled while she held out her hand. I clasped that soft snowflake, and as I did so, a faint thrill tingled over me and rested on my heart, stopping for the moment its beating. It will help me to have the thingy that keeps track of where I am. This contact seemed also to have affected her as it did me. A clear flush, like a white flame, lighted up her face, so that it glowed as if an alabaster lamp had been lit. Her black eyes became softer and more humid as our glances crossed, and her scarlet lips grew moist. She was a living woman now, while before she had seemed half a corpse. She permitted her white, slender hand to remain in mine longer than most people do at an introduction, and then she slowly withdrew it, still regarding me with steadfast eyes for a second or two afterwards. Fathomless, velvety eyes these were, Yet before they were shifted from mine, they appeared to have absorbed all my willpower and made me her abject slave. They looked like deep, dark pools of clear water. Yet they filled me with fire and deprived me of strength. I sank into my chair almost as languidly as I had risen from my bed that morning. Yet I made a good breakfast, and although she hardly tasted anything, the strange girl rose much refreshed and with a slight glow of color on her cheeks, which improved her so greatly that she appeared younger and almost beautiful. We have been interrupted by a child. Baby girl, please do not knock anything over. We have a delicate balance. Come here. We're reading about a vampire girl. Get your butt, your asshole off the screen, please. Yes, vampires. Like we do every Sunday. Okay. Who knows if she'll stay here. I had come here seeking solitude, but since I had seen Adrienne, it seemed as if I had come for her only. She was not very lively. Indeed, thinking back, I cannot recall any spontaneous remark of hers. She answered my questions by monosyllables and left me to lead in words. Yet she was insinuating and appeared to lead my thoughts in her direction and speak to me with her eyes. I cannot describe her minutely. I only know that from the first glance and touch she gave me, I was bewitched and could think of nothing else. It was a rapid, distracting, and devouring infatuation that possessed me. All day long, I followed her about like a dog. Every night I dreamed of that white glowing face, those steadfast black eyes, those moist scarlet lips, and each morning I rose more languid than I had been the day before. Sometimes I dreamt that she was kissing me with those red lips, while I shivered at the contact of her silky black tresses as they covered my throat. Sometimes that we were floating in the air, her arms about me, and her long hair enveloping us both like an inky cloud, while I lay supine and helpless. Pause to drink some water. Oop. We're good. She went with me after breakfast on that first day to the moor, and before we came back, I had spoken my love and received her assent. I held her in my arms and had taken her kisses in answer to mine, nor did I think it strange that all this had happened so quickly. She was mine, or rather I was hers, without a pause. I told her it was fate that had sent me to her, for I had no doubts about my love, and she replied that I had restored her to life. Acting upon Adrienne's advice, and also from a natural shyness, I did not inform her mother how quickly matters had progressed between us. Yet, although we both acted as circumspectly as possible, I had no doubt Mrs. Brunwell could see how engrossed we were in each other. Lovers are not unlike ostriches in their modes of concealment. I was not afraid of asking Mrs. Brunwell for her daughter, for she already showed her partiality towards me, and had bestowed upon me some confidences regarding her own position in life, and I therefore knew that, so far as social position was concerned, there could be no real objection to our marriage. They lived in this lonely spot for the sake of their health, and kept no servant, because they could not get any to take service so far away from other humanity. My coming had been opportune and welcome to both mother and daughter. For the sake of decorum, however, I resolved to delay my confession for a week or two, and trust to some favorable opportunity of doing it discreetly. Meantime, Adrienne and I passed our time in a thoroughly idle just saw me realize in real time that my dyslexia gave her a completely different name. No, it's like oh no, how do you say this? No wonder my brain went, oh, Adrienne, that makes sense. No, the D's at the end of the name, not the beginning. What did I even say the first time? Aria? Ariadne. Ariadne. Ariadne? Ariadne. Ariadne. I can say that. That's what her name is. I don't think I have dyslexia, but I definitely like panic when I see a word I don't know how to like say. And then my brain is just like, oh, just add like move them slightly around and it'll make sense. it's never. Who cares? Anyway. Ariadne. You know what? That sounds kind of like something in like a Greek myth somewhere, so I'm going with it. Meantime, Ariadne and I passed our time in a thoroughly idle and lotus-eating style. Each night I retired to bed, meditating, starting work next day. Each morning I rose languid from those disturbing dreams with no thought for anything outside my love. She grew stronger every day, while I appeared to be taking her place as the invalid. Yet I was more frantically in love than ever, and only happy when with her. She was my lodestar, my only joy, my life. We did not go great distances, for I liked best to lie on the dry heath and watch her glowing face and intense eyes while I listened to the surging of the distant waves. It was love made me lazy, I thought, for unless a man has all he longs for beside him, he is apt to copy the domestic cat and bask in the sunshine. I had been enchanted quickly. My disenchantment came as rapidly, although it was long before the poison left my blood. One night, about a couple of weeks after my coming to the cottage, I had returned after a delicious moonlight walk with Ariadne. The night was warm, and the moon at the full. Therefore, I left my bedroom window open to let in what little air there was. I was more than usually... What do you mean? It's just randomly a slur in the middle. I'm just gonna say it. I was more than usually tired, so that I had only strength enough to remove my boots and coat before I flung myself warily on the coverlet and fell almost instantly asleep without tasting the nightcap draught that was constantly placed at the table, and which I had always drained thirstily. I had a ghastly dream this night. I thought I saw a monster bat with the face and tresses of Ariadne fly into the open window and fasten its white teeth and scarlet lips on my arm. I tried to beat the horror away, but could not, for I seemed chained down, enthralled also with drowsy delight, as the beast sucked my blood with a gruesome rapture. I looked out dreamily and saw a line of dead bodies of young men lying on the floor, each with a red mark on their arms, on the same part where the vampire was then sucking me. And I remembered having seen and wondered at such a mark on my own arm for the past fortnight. In a flash, I understood the reason for my strange weakness. And at the same moment, a sudden prick of pain roused me from my dreamy pleasure. The vampire, in her eagerness, had bitten a little too deeply that night, unaware that I had not tasted the drugged draught. As I woke, I saw her fully revealed by the midnight moon, with her black tresses flowing loosely, and with her red lips glued to my arm. With a shriek of horror, I dashed her backwards, getting one last glimpse of her savage eyes, glowing white face, and blood-stained red lips. Then I rushed out to the night, moved on by my fear and hatred, nor did I pause in my mad flight until I had left miles behind me in the accursed cottage on the moor. End of that story. The Vampire Maid, by Hume Nisbet. And we're continuing on with a story by the exact same person, The Old Portrait. I liked the beginning of that, actually. I remembered, what was it? It was like, this is the mood which comes upon every sensitive and artistic mind. Where there, it was just cute. It's cute because I'm like, I'm not an artist per se. I'm not like somebody who makes art and sells it and stuff. But I am I do a lot of like creative hobbies because they keep my moods in check to a degree. So I have like I've dabbled in painting and drawing and a lot of crochet and things. So it's funny when everybody's like, those sensitive, silly artists who need to go out to the moor to get away from society before they lose their mind. It's just funny. Like, yeah, you know what? It's true. It's true. Get me a cabin on the moor and maybe it'll fix all of my problems. Maybe I'm just a moody, sensitive artist. Anyway, I like that one. It was short and sweet and lovely. And classic, too. It doesn't really deviate from any part of the vampire story. I liked it. It was intriguing. Interesting that she had a supposed mother living with her and helping her out. I wonder what purpose the mother has. Is she the like the victim when there isn't a handsome man to feed on to keep her going, you know? Maybe. I don't know. I'm just talking right now. Okay, the old portrait. Old-fashioned frames are a hobby of mine. I am always on the prowl amongst the framers and dealers in curiosities for something quaint and unique in picture frames. I don't care much for what is inside them. For being a painter, it is my fancy to get the frames first, and then paint a picture which I think suits their probable history and design. In this way, I get some curious and I think also some original ideas. One day in December, about a week before Christmas, I picked up a fine but dilapidated specimen of wood carving in a shop near Soho. The gilding had been worn nearly away, and 3 of the corners broken off. Yet as there was one of the corners still left, I hoped to be able to repair the others from it. As for the canvas inside this frame, it was so smothered with dirt and time stains that I could only distinguish it had been a very badly painted likeness of some sort, of some commonplace person, dabbed in by a poor pot-boiling painter to fill the second-hand frame, which his patron may have picked up cheaply as I had done after him. But as the frame was all right, I took the spoiled canvas along with it, thinking it might come in handy. For the next few days, my hands were full of work of one kind and another, so that it was only on Christmas Eve that I found myself at liberty to examine my purchase, which had been lying with its face to the wall since I had brought it to my studio. Having nothing to do on this night and not in the mood to go out, I got my picture and frame from the corner, and laying them upon the table with a sponge, basin of water, and some soap, I began to wash so that I might see them the better. They were in a terrible mess, and I think I used the best part of a packet of soap powder and had to change the water about a dozen times before the pattern began to show up on the frame, and the portrait within it asserted its awful crudeness, vile drawing, and intense vulgarity. It was the bloated, piggish visage of a publican clearly, with a plentiful supply of jewelry displayed, as is usual with such masterpieces, where the features are not considered of so much importance as a strict fidelity in the depicting of such articles as watch-guard and seals, finger rings, and breast pins. These were all there, as natural and hard as reality. The frame delighted me, and the picture satisfied me that I had not cheated the dealer with my price, and I was looking at the monstrosity and the gaslight beat full upon it, and wondering how the owner could be pleased with himself as thus depicted, when something about the background attracted my attention. A slight marking underneath the thin coat, as if the portrait had been painted over some other subject. It was not much, certainly, yet enough to make me rush over to my cupboard, where I kept my spirits of wine and turpentine, with which, in a plentiful supply of rags, I began to demolish the publican ruthlessly, in the vague hope that I might find something worth looking at underneath. A slow process that it was, as well as a delicate one, so that it was close upon midnight before the gold cable rings and vermilion visage disappeared, and another picture loomed up before me, then giving it the final wash over. I wiped it dry and set it in a good light on my easel, where I filled and lit my pipe, and then sat down to look at it. What had I liberated from that vile prison of crude paint? For I did not require to set it up to know that this bungler of the brush had covered and defiled a work as far beyond his comprehension as the clouds are from the caterpillar. The bust and head of a young woman of uncertain age, merged within a gloom of rich accessories, painted as only a master hand can paint who is above asserting his knowledge and who has learnt to cover his technique. It was as perfect and natural in its somber yet quiet dignity as if it had come from the brush of Moroni. A face and neck perfectly colorless in their pallid whiteness, with the shadows so artfully managed that they could not be seen, and for this quality would have delighted the strong-minded Queen Bess. At first, as I looked, I saw in the center of a vague darkness a dim patch of gray gloom that drifted into the shadow. Then the grayness appeared to grow lighter as I sat from it, and leaned back in my chair until the features stole out softly and became clear and definite, while the figure stood out from the background as if tangible, although, having washed it, I knew that it had been smoothly painted. An intent face with delicate nose, well-shaped, although bloodless lips, and eyes like dark caverns without a spark of light in them. The hair loosely about the head and oval cheeks, massive, silky textured, jet black and lusterless, which hid the upper portion of her brow, with the ears, and fell in straight and definite waves over the left breast, leaving the right portion of the transparent neck exposed. The dress and background were symphonies of ebony, yet full of subtle coloring and masterly feeling. A dress of... Sorry, there was like a really loud truck. A dress of rich brocaded velvet with a background that represented vast receding space, wondrously suggestive and awe-inspiring. I noticed that the pallid lips were parted slightly and showed a glimpse of the upper front teeth, which added to the intent expression of the face. A short upper lip which curled upward, with the underlip full and sensuous, or rather, if color had been in it, would have been so. It was an eerie-looking face that I had resurrected on this midnight hour of Christmas Eve, and its passive pallidity, it looked as if the blood had been drained from the body, and that I was gazing upon an open-eyed corpse. The frame, also, I noticed for the first time, and its details appeared to have been designed with the intention of carrying out the idea of life and death. What had before looked like scroll work of flowers and fruit were loathsome snake-like worms twined amongst charnel house bones, which they half covered in a decorative fashion, a hideous design in spite of its exquisite workmanship that made me shudder, and with that I had left the cleaning to be done by daylight. I am not at all of a nervous temperament, and would have laughed had anyone told me that I was afraid, and yet, as I sat there alone, with that portrait opposite to me in this solitary studio, away from all human contact, for none of the other studios were tenanted on this night, and the janitor had gone on his holiday, I wished that I had spent my evening in a more congenial manner, for in spite of a good fire in the stove and the brilliant gas, that intent face and those haunting eyes were exercising a strange influence upon me. I heard the clocks from the different steeples chime out the last hour of the day, one after the other, like echoes taking up the refrain and dying away in the distance, and still I sat spellbound, looking at that weird picture, with my neglected pipe in my hand and a strange lassitude creeping over me. It was the eyes which fixed me now with the wow, Jesus Christ. It is not hard to say words. Unfathomable. It was the eyes which fixed me now with the unfathomable depths and absorbing intensity. They gave out no light, but seemed to draw my soul into them, and with it my life and strength as I lay inert before them, until, overpowered, I lost consciousness and dreamt. I thought that the frame was still on the easel with the canvas, but the woman had stepped from them and was approaching me with a floating motion, leaving behind her a vault filled with coffins. Some of them shut down, whilst others lay or stood upright and open, showing the grisly contents in their decaying and stained cerements. And the grisly contents in their decaying and stained cerements. I could only see her head and shoulders with the somber drapery of the upper portion and the inky wealth of hair hanging round. She was with me now, that pallid face touching my face, and those cold, bloodless lips glued to mine with a close, lingering kiss, while the soft black hair covered me like a cloud and thrilled me through and through with a delicious thrill that, whilst it made me grow faint and intoxicated me with delight. As I breathed, she seemed to absorb it quickly into herself, giving me back nothing, getting stronger as I was becoming weaker, while the warmth of my contact passed into her and made her palpitate with vitality. With vitality. And all at once, the horror of approaching death seized upon me, and with a frantic effort, I flung her from me and started up from my chair, dazed for a moment and uncertain where I was. Then consciousness returned, and I looked round wildly. The gas was still blazing brightly, while the fire burned ruddy in the stove. By the timepiece on the mantel, I could see that it was 12:30. The picture and frame were still on the easel, only as I looked at them, the portrait had changed. A hectic flush was on the cheeks, while the eyes glittered with life, and the sensuous lips were red and ripe-looking, with a drop of blood still upon the nether one. In a frenzy of horror, I seized my scraping knife and slashed out the vampire picture. Then, tearing the mutilated fragments out, I crammed them into my stove and watched them frizzle with savage delight. I have that frame still, but I have not yet courage to paint a suitable subject for it. End of story. The old portrait. Interesting and fun take on a vampire. I was wondering where it was going. It should have been obvious, right? But I was wondering, like, how do you make, like, a picture of somebody into a vampire? Like, she's just a supposed dead-looking lady. Like, somebody made a painting of, like, a corpse. For real. Interesting. I liked it. I kind of wish this person wrote longer stories. Or at least, if they had written longer stories about vampires, that it was included in this anthology. It does say it's from, both of them are from a Christmas annual entitled Stories Weird and Wonderful 1900. So, gonna just assume they're the only vampire stories he wrote. I like them. I like the vibe. I like the drama. I like how short and sweet and to the point they are. I like the concept of the creatures looking dead, and then they look beautiful and sexy and full of life as they drain your life. Anyway, next story is Marsyas in Flanders. I hope I don't have to actually say that word again. Marsyas. Is that a person? Is that a thing? I closed my keyboard. Let me check. Let's see if this is a real thing. Ugh. Marsyas. In Greek mythology, the satyr is a central figure in two stories involving music. Interesting. In one, he picked up the double oboe, which had been abandoned by Athena, and played it. In the other, he challenged Apollo to a contest of music and lost his hide and life. Literary sources from antiquity often emphasize the hubris of Marsyas and the justice of his punishment. Cool. Okay. So this is going to be a story about hubris. Musical hubris, I assume. We'll see. Move this back over there. Out of my way. Drink some water. My brain wants to read the story as fast as possible because even when I'm listening to audiobooks, I have them at like 1.75 speed. Sometimes 2, but usually it's a little too fast for me. But like, I can't do that. I physically could not do that. Marsyas in Flanders by Vernon Lee. Vernon Lee, pseudonym of Violet Paget, 1856 to 1935, wrote all her highly acclaimed weird fiction in a relatively short period from 1881 to 1911. Marsyas in Flanders was written in 1900 but did not appear in a collection until 1927. Montague Summers once declared that even La Fanu and M.R. James cannot be ranked above the genius of this lady. Ooh, nice. Intriguing. It is the longer of the stories so far tonight. Not that long. 10 pages. I mean, the print is tiny, so 10 pages is a lot. I was checking to see if this was going to be annoying to read lengthwise because it starts with, clearly it's in parts. It looks like 3 parts. It should be fine. Yeah, it'll be fine. It'll fit squarely into our streaming time. Okay. 1. You are right. This is not the original crucifix at all. Another one has been put instead. Substitution. And the little old antiquary of Dunes nodded mysteriously, fixing his ghost seer's eyes upon mine. He said it in a scarce audible whisper, for it happened to be the vigil of the Feast of the Crucifix, and the once famous church was full of semi-clerical persons decorating it for the morrow, and of old ladies in strange caps, clattering about with pails and brooms. The antiquary had brought me there the very moment of my arrival, lest the crowd of faithful should prevent his showing me everything next morning. The famous crucifix was exhibited behind rows and rows of unlit candles, and surrounded by strings of paper, flowers, and colored muslin, and garlands of sweet, resinous maritime pine, and 2 lighted chandeliers illumined. Just say illuminated. Illumined. There has been an exchange, he repeated, looking round that no one might hear him. Substitution. I think that's Latin. For I had remarked, as anyone would have done, at the first glance, that the crucifix had every appearance of French work of the 13th century, boldly realistic, whereas the crucifix of the legend, which was a work of St. Luke, which had hung for centuries in the Holy Sepulchre of Jerusalem and been miraculously cast ashore at Dunes in 1195, would surely have been a more or less Byzantine image, like its miraculous companion of Lucca. But why should there have been a substitution, I inquired innocently. Hush, hush, answered the antiquary, frowning. Not here. Later. He took me all over the church, once so famous for pilgrimages, but from which, even like the sea which has left it in a salt marsh beneath the cliffs, the tide of devotion had receded for centuries. It is a very dignified little church, of charmingly restrained in shapely Gothic, built of a delicate pale stone which the sea damp has picked out, in bases and capitals and carved foliation, with stains of a lovely bright green. The antiquary showed me where the transept and belfry had been left unfinished when the miracles had diminished in the 14th century. As he took me up to the curious warder's chamber, a large room up some steps in the triforium with a fireplace and stone seats for the men who guarded the precious crucifix day and night. There had even been beehives in the window, he told me, and he remembered seeing them still as a child. Was it usual, here in Flanders, to have a guard room in churches containing important relics? I asked, for I could not remember having seen anything similar before. By no means, he answered, looking round to make sure we were alone, but it wasn't necessary here. You have never heard in what the chief miracles of this church consisted. No, I whispered back, gradually infected by his mysteriousness, unless you allude to the legend that the figure of the Savior broke all the crosses until the right one was cast up by the sea. He shook his head, but did not answer, and descended the steep stairs into the nave, while I lingered a moment looking down into it from the warder's chamber. I have never had so curious an impression of a church. The chandeliers on either side of the crucifix whirled slowly round, making great pools of light which were broken by the shadows of the clustered columns, and among the pews of the nave moved the flicker of the sacristan's lamp. The lamp was full of the scent of resinous pine branches, evoking dunes and mountainsides, and from the busy groups below rose a subdued chatter of women's voices, and a splash of water and clatter of patterns. It vaguely suggested preparations for a witch's Sabbath. What sort of miracles did they have in this church? I asked, when we had passed into the dusky square. And what did you mean about their having exchanged the crucifix? About a substitution? It seemed quite dark outside. The church rose black, a vague, lopsided mass of buttresses and high-pitched roofs. Against the watery, moonlit sky, the big trees of the churchyard behind wavering about in the sea wind, and the windows shone yellow, like flaming portals in the darkness. Please remark the bold effect of the gargoyles, said the antiquary, pointing upwards. They jutted out, vague wild beasts from the roof line. It was such a non sequitur that I had to make sure I didn't skip a page. No, he just said, look at the gargoyles. They jutted out, vague wild beasts from the roof line, and what was positively frightening, you saw the moonlight, yellow and blue through the open jaws of some of them. A gust swept through the trees, making the weathercock clatter and groan. Why, those gargoyle wolves seem positively to howl, I exclaimed. The old antiquary chuckled. Aha, he answered. Did I not tell you that this church has witnessed things like no other church in Christendom? And it still remembers them. There, have you ever known such a wild, savage church before? And as he spoke, there suddenly mingled with the sough of the wind and the groans of the weather vane, a shrill quivering sound as of pipers inside. The organist trying his vox humana for tomorrow, remarked the antiquary. 2. Okay. Sorry, trying to remember not to swallow into the mic for the first time ever. I kind of forget that people hate those noises. I should be more cognizant of not making them, just to not annoy people. Also, another random insert. For somebody who reads a lot about vampires, and vampires are rooted in Christianity, maybe Catholicism, but definitely Christianity. I don't really know enough about that. I don't know enough about churches and crucifixes and all this crap. I am an outsider looking in and going, I need to Wikipedia that. Okay, 2. Next day, I bought some of the printed histories of the miraculous crucifix, which they were hawking all round the church. And next day also, my friend the antiquary was good enough to tell me all that he knew of the matter. Between my two informants, the following may be said to be the true story. In the autumn of 1195, after a night of frightful storm, a boat was found cast upon the shore of Dunes, which was at that time a fishing village in the mouth of the Nice, and exactly opposite a terrible sunken reef. The boat was broken and upset, and close to it, on the sand and bent grass, lay a stone figure of the crucified Savior, without its cross, and as seems probable, also without its arms, which had been made of separate blocks. A variety of persons immediately came forward to claim it. The little church of Dunes, on whose glebe it was found, the barons of Croy, who had the right of jetsam on that coast, and also the great abbey of Saint Loup of Arras, also possessing the spiritual overlordship of the place. But a holy man who lived close by in the cliffs had a vision which settled the dispute. St. Luke in person appeared and told him that he was the original maker of the figure, that it had been one of three which had hung round the holy sepulchre of Jerusalem, that 3 knights, a Norman, a Tuscan, and a man of Arras, had with the permission of heaven stolen them from the infidels and placed them on unmanned boats, that one of the images had been cast upon the Norman coast near Salonelles, that the second had run aground not far from the city of Lucca in Italy, and that this third was the one which had been embarked by the knight of Artois, is regarded its final resting place, the hermit, on the authority of St. Luke, recommended that the statue should be left to decide the matter itself. Accordingly, the crucified figure was solemnly cast back into the sea. The very next day it was found once more in the same spot, among the sand and bent grass in the mouth of the Nice. It was therefore deposited in the little church of Dunes, and very soon indeed the flocks of pious persons who brought it offerings from all parts made it necessary and possible to rebuild the church thus sanctified by its presence. The holy effigy of Dunes, Sacra Danorum effigies, as it was called, did not work the ordinary sort of miracles, but its fame spread far and wide by the unexampled wonders which became the constant accompaniment of its existence. The effigy, as above mentioned, had been discovered without the cross to which it had evidently been fastened, nor had any researchers nor any subsequent storms brought the missing blocks to light, despite the many prayers which were offered for the purpose. After some time, therefore, and a deal of discussion, it was decided that a new cross should be provided for the effigy to hang upon, and certain skillful stonemasons of Arras were called to Dunes for this purpose. But behold, the very day after the cross had been solemnly erected in the church, an unheard of and terrifying fact was discovered. The effigy, which had been hanging perfectly straight the previous evening, had shifted its position and was bent violently to the right, as if in an effort to break loose. This was attested not merely by hundreds of laymen, but by the priests of the place, who notified the fact in a document existing in the episcopal archives of Arras until 1790, to the abbot of St. Loup, their spiritual overlord. It was the beginning of a series of mysterious occurrences which spread the fame of the marvelous crucifix all over Christendom. The effigy did not remain in the position until which it had miraculously worked itself. It was found, at intervals of time, shifted in some other manner upon its cross, and always as if it had gone through violent contortions. And one day, about 10 years after it had been cast up by the sea, the priests of the church and the burghers of Dunes discovered the effigy hanging in its original outstretched, symmetrical attitude, but oh wonder, with the cross, broken in 3 places, lying on the steps of its chapel. Certain persons who lived in the end of the town nearest the church reported to have been roused in the middle of the night by what they had taken for a violent clap of thunder, but which was doubtless the crash of the cross falling down, or perhaps, who knows, the noise with which the terrible effigy had broken loose and spurned the alien cross from it. For that was the secret. The effigy, made by a saint, and come to Dunes by miracle, had evidently found some trace of unholiness in the stone to which it had been fastened. Such was the ready explanation afforded by the prior of the church, an answer to an angry summons of the abbot of St. Loup, who expressed his disapproval of such unusual miracles. Indeed, it was discovered that the piece of marble had not been cleaned from sinful human touch with the necessary rites before the figure was fastened on, a most grave, though excusable, oversight. So a new cross was ordered, although it was noticed that much time was lost about it, and the consecration took place only some years later. While the prior had built the warder's chamber with the fireplace and recess, and obtained permission from the Pope himself that a clerk in orders should watch day and night, on the score that so wonderful a relic might be stolen. For the relic had by this time entirely cut out all similar crucifixes, and the village of Dunes, through the concourse of pilgrims, had rapidly grown into a town, the property of the now fabulously wealthy Priory of the Holy Cross. The abbots of St. Loup, however, looked upon the matter with an unfavorable eye. Although nominally remaining their vassals, the priors of Dunes had contrived to obtain gradually from the Pope privileges which rendered them virtually independent, and in particular, immunities which sent to the treasury of St. Loup only a small portion of the tribute money brought to by the pilgrims. Abbot Walterius, in particular, showed himself actively hostile. He accused the priors of Dunes of having employed his warders to trump up stories of strange movements and sounds on the part of the still crossless effigy, and of suggesting to the ignorant changes in its attitude which were more credulously believed in now that there was no longer the straight line of the cross by which to verify. So finally the new cross was made and consecrated, and on Holy Cross Day of the year, the effigy was fastened to it in the presence of an immense concourse of clergy and laity. The effigy, it was now supposed, would be satisfied, and no unusual occurrences would increase or perhaps fatally compromise its reputation for sanctity. Having trouble focusing on this story because I'm bored because I don't care. I don't care. You want to scare me with a vampire, you gotta try harder than be like, oh, this like Jesus statue that popped out of the water one day doesn't like crosses. Okay, sure. I forgot to not drink under the microphone. It's a learning. We're learning. These expectations were violently dispelled in November 1293, after a year of strange rumors concerning the effigy. The figure was again discovered to have moved, and continued moving, or rather, judging from the position on the cross, writhing. And on Christmas Eve of the same year, the cross was a second time thrown down and dashed to pieces. The priest on duty was, at the same time, found, it was thought, dead in his warder's chamber. Another cross was made, and this time privately consecrated and put in place, and a hole in the roof made a pretext to close the church for a while, and to perform the rites of purification necessary after its pollution by workmen. Indeed, it was remarked that on this occasion the prior of Dunes took as much trouble to diminish, and if possible to hide away the miracles, as his predecessor had done his best to blazon the preceding ones abroad. The priests had been on duty on the eventful Christmas Eve disappeared mysteriously. and it was thought by many persons that he had gone and was confined in the prior's prison for fear of the revelations he might make. For by this time, and not without some encouragement from the abbots of Arras, extraordinary stories had begun to circulate about the goings-on in the Church of Dunes. This church, be it remembered, stood a little above the town, isolated and surrounded by big trees. It was surrounded by the precincts of the priory, and, save on the water side, by high walls. Nevertheless, persons there were who affirmed that, the wind having been in that direction, they had heard strange noises come from the church of nights. During storms, particularly, sounds had been heard which were variously described as howls, groans, and the music of rustic dancing. A master mariner affirmed that one Halloween, as his boat approached the mouth of the Nis, he had seen the Church of Dunes brilliantly lit up, its immense windows flaming. But as he suspected of being drunk, and of having exaggerated the effect of the small light shining from the warder's chamber, the interest of the townsfolk of Dunes coincided with that of the priory, since they prospered greatly by the pilgrimages, so these tales were promptly hushed up. Yet they undoubtedly reached the ear of the abbot of St. Loup, and at last there came an event which brought them all back to the surface. For, on the vigil of All Saints, 1299, the church was struck by lightning. The new warder was found dead in the middle of the nave, the cross broken in two, and oh horror, the effigy was missing. The indescribable fear which overcame everyone was merely increased by the discovery of the effigy lying behind the high altar, in an attitude of frightful convulsion, and, it was whispered, blackened by lightning. This was the end of the strange doings at Dunes. An ecclesiastical maybe you know the word I'm trying to say. Maybe you don't. I'm moving on. Council was held at Arras. And I swear to God, I know that word. And the church shut once more for nearly a year. It was opened this time and reconsecrated by the abbot of St. Loup, whom the prior of Holy Cross served humbly at Mass. A new chapel had been built, and in it the miraculous crucifix was displayed, dressed in more splendid brocade and gems than usual, and its head nearly hidden by one of the most gorgeous crowns ever seen before, a gift, it was said, of the Duke of Burgundy. All this new splendor, in the presence of the great abbot himself, was presently explained to the faithful, when the prior came forward to announce that a last and greatest miracle had now taken place. The original cross, on which the figure had hung in the church of the Holy Sepulchre, and for which the effigy had spurned all others made by less holy hands, had been cast on the shore of Dunes, on the very spot where, 100 years before, the figure of the Savior had been discovered in the sands. This, said the prior, was the explanation of the terrible occurrences which had filled all hearts with anguish. The holy effigy was now satisfied. It would rest in peace, and its miraculous powers would be engaged only in granting the prayers of the faithful. Oh my God. I'm trying not to be bored. I hope you're not also bored. One half of the forecast came true. From that day forward, the effigy never shifted its position, but from that day forward also, no considerable miracle was ever registered. The devotion of Dunes diminished. Other relics threw the sacred effigy into the shade, and the pilgrimages dwindling to mere local gatherings, the church was never brought to completion. What had happened? No one ever knew, guessed, or perhaps even asked. But when 1790 the archiepiscopal palace of Arras was sacked, A certain notary of the neighborhood bought a large portion of the archives at the price of waste paper, either from historical curiosity or expecting to obtain thereby facts which might gratify his aversion to the clergy. These documents lay unexamined for many years, till my friend the antiquary bought them. Among them, taken helter-skelter from the archbishop's palace, were sundry papers referring to the suppressed abbey of St. Loup of Arras, and among these latter, a series of notes concerning the affairs of the Church of Dunes. They were, so far as their fragmentary nature explains, the minutes of an inquest made in 1309 and contained the deposition of sundry witnesses. To understand their meaning, it is necessary to remember that this was the time when witch trials had begun, and when the proceedings against the Templars had set the fashion of inquests, which could help the finances of the country while furthering the interests of religion. What appears to have happened is that after the catastrophe of the Vigil of All Saints, October 1299, the prior, Urbain de Luc, found himself suddenly threatened with a charge of sacrilege and witchcraft, of obtaining miracles of the effigy by devilish means, and of converting his church into a chapel of the evil one. Instead of appealing to high ecclesiastical... Why can't I say this? My brain does not... Ecclesiastical. If I look away, I can say it. Wow, I was not expecting for that to come out of my mouth. Ecclesiastical tribunals, as the privileges obtained from the Holy See would have warranted. Prior Urbain guessed that this charge came originally from the wrathful abbot of St. Loup, and, dropping all his pretensions in order to save himself, he threw himself upon the mercy of the abbot, whom he had hitherto flouted. The abbot appears to have been satisfied by his submission, and the matter to have dropped after a few legal preliminaries, of which the notes found among the archiepiscopal archives of Arras represented a portion. Some of these notes my friend the antiquary kindly allowed me to translate from the Latin, and I give them here, leaving the reader to make what he can of them. Item. The abbot expresses himself satisfied with that his reverence the prior has had no personal knowledge of, or dealings with the evil one, Diabolus. Nevertheless, the gravity of the charge requires... Here the page is torn. Hugues Jacquois, Simon Le Quevereux, Pierre Denis, burghers of Dunes, being interrogated, witness that the noises from the Church of the Holy Cross always happened on nights of bad storms and foreboded shipwrecks on the coast, and were very various, such as terrifying rattling groans, howls as of wolves, and occasional flute playing. A certain Jahan, who has twice been branded and flogged for lighting fires on the coast, and otherwise causing ships to wreck at the mouth of the Nis, being promised immunity after 2 or 3 slate pulls on the rack, witnesses as follows. God damn, they beat the crap out of this man. That the bands of wreckers to which he belongs always knew when a dangerous storm was brewing, on account of the noises which issued from the Church of Dunes. Witnesses had often climbed the walls and prowled round in the churchyard, waiting to hear such noises. He was not unfamiliar with the howlings and roarings mentioned by the previous witnesses. He had heard tell by a countryman who passed in the night that the howling was such that the countryman thought himself pursued by a pack of wolves, although it is well known that no wolf has been seen in these parts for 30 years. But the witness himself is of the opinion that the most singular of all the noises, and the one which always accompanied or foretold the worst storms, was a noise of flutes and pipes. And then that's said again in, I don't know, Latin. I'm not saying that. So sweet that the King of France could not have sweeter at his court. Being interrogated whether he had ever seen anything, the witness answers that he has seen the church brightly lit up from the sands, but on approaching found all dark, save the light from the warder's chamber. That once, by moonlight, the piping and fluting and howling being uncommonly loud, he thought he had seen wolves and a human figure on the roof, but that he ran away from fear, and cannot be sure. I'm gonna pause to drink some water. Item. His lordship, the abbot, desires the right reverend prior to answer truly, placing his hand on the Gospels, whether or not he had himself heard such noises. The right reverend prior denies ever having heard anything similar, but being threatened with further proceedings, in quotations, or not quotations, parentheses, the rack, acknowledges that he had frequently been told of these noises by the warder on duty. Query. Whether the right reverend prior was ever told anything else by the warder. Answer. Yes, but under the seal of confession. The last warder, moreover, the one killed by lightning, had been a reprobate priest, having committed the greatest crimes and obliged to take asylum, whom the prior had kept there on account of the difficulty of finding a man sufficiently courageous for the office. Query. Whether the prior has ever questioned previous warders. Answer. That the warders were bound to reveal only in confession whatever they had heard. That the prior's predecessors had kept the seal of confession inviolate, and that, though unworthy, the prior himself desired to do alike. Query. What had become of the warder who had been found in a swoon after the occurrences of Halloween? Answer. That the prior does not know. The warder was crazy. The prior believes he was secluded for that reason. A disagreeable surprise had been, apparently, arranged for Prior Urbain de Luc, for the next entry states that, item, by order of his magnificence, the Lord Abbot, certain servants of the Lord Abbot aforesaid introduce Robert Badouin. Oh God. Badouin. I can. If we say it wrong, we just have to keep saying it so you know who I mean. Priest. Once warder in the Church of the Holy Cross, who has been kept 10 years in prison by his reverence the prior, as being of unsound mind. Witness manifests great terror on finding himself in the presence of their lordships, and particularly of his reverence the prior, and refuses to speak, hiding his face in his hands and uttering shrieks. Being comforted with kind words by those present, nay, even most graciously by my lord the abbot himself, Etienne, threatened with the rack if he continue obdurate, this witness deposes as follows, not without much lamentation, shrieking and senseless jabber after the manner of madmen. Not a lot of sympathy. Jesus. Query. Can he remember what happened on the vigil of All Saints and the Church of Dunes before he swooned on the floor of the church? Answer. He cannot. It would be sin to speak of such things before great spiritual lords. Moreover, he is but an ignorant man and also mad. Moreover, his hunger is great. Being given white bread from the Lord Abbot's own table, witness is again cross-questioned. Query. What can he remember of the events of the Vigil of All Saints? Answer. Thinks he was not always mad. Thinks he has not always been in prison. Thinks he once went in a boat on sea, etc. Query. Does witness think he has ever been in the Church of Dunes? Answer. Cannot remember, but is sure that he was not always in prison. Query. Has witness ever heard anything like that? My lord, the abbot, having secretly ordered that a certain fool in his service, an excellent musician should suddenly play the pipes behind the arras, at which sound witness began to tremble and sob and fall on his knees and catch hold of the robe even of my lord the abbot, hiding his head therein. Query, wherefore does he feel such terror, being in the fatherly presence of so clement a prince as the lord abbot? Answer, that witness cannot stand that piping any longer, that it freezes his blood, that he was told the prior many times that he will not remain any longer in the warder's chamber, that he is afraid for his life, that he dare not make the sign of the cross, nor say his prayers for fear of the great wild man, that the great wild man took the cross and broke it in two, and played at quoits with it in the nave, that all the wolves trooped down from the roof howling, and danced on their hind legs, while the great wild man played the pipes on the high altar. That witness had surrounded himself with a hedge of little crosses, made of broken rye straw, to keep off the great wild man from the warder's chamber. Ah, 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 he is piping again. The wolves are howling. He is rising the tempest. Item, that no further information can be extracted from witness, who falls on the floor like one possessed, and has to be removed from the presence of his lordship the abbot and his reverence the prior. I don't know why these people are crying. That sounds like a fun time. Some weird little dude just plays some pipes, and there's like wolves running around, and everybody's dancing. We're just hanging out. Sounds more fun and interesting than hanging at a church all the goddamn time, staring at a fucking effigy and then being like, wow, it got crooked. Like in the middle of the night, it just turned crooked. I think it's possessed. Yeah, or you just nailed it to the wall imperfectly, but sure. What am I saying? I'm being a party pooper because the story's kind of boring. Okay. End of part 2, by the way. Here, a little more water. Sorry if I'm a little bit insufferable when I'm bored. 3. Here the minutes of the inquest break off. Did those great spiritual dignitaries ever get to learn more about the terrible doings in the Church of Dunes? Did they ever guess at their cause? For there was a cause, said the antiquary, folding his spectacles after reading me these notes. Or more strictly, the cause still exists, and you will understand, though those learned priests of 6 centuries ago could not. And rising, he fetched a key from the shelf and preceded me into the yard of his house, situated on the Nice, a mile below Dunes. Between the low steadings, one saw the salt marsh, lilac with sea lavender, the island of birds, a great sand bank at the mouth of the Nice, where every kind of sea fowl gathers, and beyond, the angry white-crested sea under an angry orange afterglow. On the other side, inland, and appearing above the farm roofs, stood the Church of Dunes, its pointed belfry and jagged outlines of gables and buttresses and gargoyles and wind-warped pines black against the easterly sky of ominous livid red. I told you, said the antiquary, stopping with the key in the lock of a big outhouse, that there had been a substitution, that the crucifix at present at Dunes is not the one miraculously cast up by the storm of 1195. I believe the present one may be identified as a life-size statue, for which a receipt exists in the archives of Arras, furnished to the abbot of St. Loup by Estienne Lemas and Guillaume Bernal, who cares, stonemasons in the year 1299. That is to say, the year of the inquest and of the cessation of all supernatural occurrences at Dunes. As to the original effigy, you shall see it and understand everything. The antiquary opened a door of a sloping, vaulted passage, lit a lantern, and led the way. It was evidently the cellar of some medieval building, and a scent of wine, of damp wood, and of fir branches from innumerable stacked up bundles of sticks filled the darkness among thick-set columns. I would like for these fucking old stories to stop surprising me with slurs. Here, said the antiquary, raising his lantern, he was buried beneath this vault, and they had run an iron stake through his middle like a vampire to prevent his rising. The effigy was erect against the dark wall, surrounded by brushwood. It was more than life-size, nude, the arms broken off at the shoulders, the head, with stubbly beard and clotted hair, drawn up with an effort, the face contracted with agony, the muscles dragged as of one hanging crucified, the feet bound together with a rope. The figure was familiar to me in various galleries. I came forward to examine the ear. It was leaf-shaped. Ah, you have understood the whole mystery, said the antiquary. I have understood, I answered, not knowing how far his thought really went, that this supposed statue of Christ is an antique satyr, a Marsyas awaiting his punishment. The antiquary nodded. Exactly, he said dryly. That is the whole explanation. Only I think the abbot and the prior were not so wrong to drive the iron stake through him when they removed him from the church. Okay. End of story. Marsyas and Flanders is the title. I forget the author's name. Vernon Lee, aka Violet Paget. Here is an illustration. Yeah. I hope you can see it, because I'm not good at holding that up. That was so disappointing. What do you mean she's one of the best writers out there? What do you mean she's one of the best out there? That was a long, drawn-out story about an effigy. And then the mystery was, like, sometimes a dude in the middle of a storm or before a storm just sort of dances around and plays the flute. And then a big storm happens, and then maybe an old man working in a church dies. And then they replace him. What do you mean there's a vampire? That was so stupid. I'm disappointed. Oh my god. Oh, we still have time for one more. I think. Let's see how long it is. Oh, it's not too long. It's about 9 pages, so should be fine. We have to. I don't want to end on that note. That note sucks. I did not enjoy it. Oh my god. Okay. An Unscientific Story by Louise J. Strong. As with its contemporaries, Harper's, Pearson's, Pall Mall, and other quality magazines of the turn of the century, The Cosmopolitan, published in New York, was a treasure trove of supernatural, weird, and bizarre fiction. It carried short stories by most of the leading writers of the era, including Bram Stoker, whose forgotten adventure yarn, The Red Stockade, decorated with illustrations of crocodiles and heads impaled on long posts, appeared in the September 1894 issue. A young artist named John Barrymore was one of the artists who showed great promise as a clearly I'm having issues tonight. Illustrator with The Catatonic Curse in 1902. Years before he became a world-famous stage and screen idol, Louise Jackson Strong's An Unscientific Story, is a unique combination of the Dracula and Frankenstein themes, featuring a small army of vampiric monstrosities created in a laboratory. The story originally appeared in the February 1903 number of the Cosmopolitan, illustrated by E. Hearing. I said all that, but I need to pause for a second to get more water so my throat doesn't hurt too much and I don't cough a lot. You sit tight right here. I will be back. It is not far away, I promise. I'm going to mute myself, though. Okay. I wanted to say before I forget, because I have like a script at the end and it's hard to remember things off script. I've been thinking, because we like to delve into like literary journals, and like not a lot of people like to do that for fun, and not a lot of people have ever even read one. So I was thinking, like, if we're going to go so far into delving into vampire stories as to analyze them academically, maybe we need more of a basis to help us understand the analysis, right? Like, I'm going from 0 to 100, but in there is like a 50 and a 25. And maybe we could delve a little bit into that 25 zone. I don't really know what you're talking about, but I want to, but I don't know where to start zone. I'm not an academic. I don't have any degrees. I've taken a couple English courses. Mostly I'm just a geek, and I like learning, and I like analyzing literature. I'm not particularly good at it. So this isn't like I'm going to have a PowerPoint and you're going to take notes or anything. But I was thinking we could delve into, at the very least, Gothic fiction genre and what that means. This anthology itself, because of the time period that it's all set in and written in, which is late 1800s to early 1900s, is pretty firmly Gothic. It's got that whole Gothic vibe. But again, like, what does that mean, you know? And I was thinking maybe I could do a second stream when I got the energy for it. And we delve into the first few Gothic novels that have been written, to just get like a better understanding of the Gothic genre and also of the beginning of the vampire mythos, because they were happening together, really. They were being created together, so why not look at that too? I've said I may be talking in circles now. Hopefully I've gotten my point across, but yeah, I was thinking it's like vampire adjacent, so there's not going to be vampires in these, but we would read, let's see, I got it on my computer, but I got things in the way. Where is it? The first one. The first couple. I downloaded them from the I think it's called Gutenberg or something. Maybe not. maybe if you're like me, you look for like free copies of books that you don't have to get from the library. Kitty cat, why would you do this to me? So you go on there and you look on Google for free copies, and if they're old and out of copyright, you can download them from that website, all for free. And I thought we would read the first few. Again, I'm talking in circles. Let's see. What's it called? The Castle. I already got The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole. And when was that written? I just started talking about it without like really planning this, but Project Gutenberg, The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, published in 1764, which is significantly before Dracula, but I think is worthy to look into. Again, it's vampire adjacent. I don't want to completely disqualify it, especially because my brain is like, vampires? You want more vampires? Do this! I'm following the whims of my brain. Thank you for following along. That's the plan. We'll see how it goes. If anybody's interested at all, probably not. Again, my main audience is me. But yeah, that's the plan. I'm not sure what days. Probably midweek, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. About the same amount of time, 2 to 3 hours to just kind of read the first couple Gothic novels and try to get an understanding of the genre. That's it. In a single sentence, that is the point. I can finish saying the exact same thing over and over. We're going back to the stories. If you're like, wow, maybe she's just like this because she's not really has a chat to talk to. No, I'm like this all of the time. This is how I talk. Just kind of ramble in circles. Okay. Story. An unscientific story. He sat, tense and rigid with excitement, expectancy, incredulity. I just started my story. Okay. She's doing the thing where she screams at me until I feed her early. But you're not going to get your food early. And one thing that calms her down is me just petting her. So now she's coughing. Are you okay? Did I give you the hiccups by picking you up? Do you have the hiccups, little one? Okay, we're going to pet her and read. He sat, tense and rigid with excitement, expectancy, incredulity. Was it possible, after so many years of steady effort and failure, could it be that at last success rewarded him? He hardly dared to breathe lest he should miss something of the wonderful spectacle. How long he had sat thus he did not know. He had not stirred for hours, or was it days, except to adjust the light by means of the button under his hand. His laboratory, at the foot of his garden, was lighted day and night in the inner room, his private workshop, with electricity, and no one was admitted but by special privilege. Some things he had accomplished for the good of mankind. More he hoped to accomplish, but most of all he had been searching for and striving to create the life germ. He had spent many of his years and much of his great wealth in unsuccessful experiments. He had met ridicule and unbelief with stoical indifference, upheld by the conviction that he would finally prove the truth of his theories. Over and over again, defeat and disappointment had dashed aside his hopes. Over and over again, he had rallied and gone on with dogged persistence. And now, he could not realize it yet, he leaned back and clasped his hands over his closed eyes. Perhaps he had imagined it, his overstrained nerves having deceived him. Was it an optical illusion? It had happened before. There had been times when he felt that he had torn aside the veil and grasped the secret, only to find that a few abortive movements were all that existed of his creation. In sudden haste, he turned to the glass again. Ah! He drew a long breath that was almost a shriek. It was not illusion of sight, no delusion of his mind. The creature, it was plainly a living creature, had grown and taken shape, even in those few movements. It lived, it breathed, it moved, and his the power that had given it life. His breath came in gasps, his heart beat in great throbs, and his blood surged through his veins. But soon his scientific sense asserted itself, and he carefully and minutely studied the prodigy. Its growth was phenomenal. The rapidity of its expansion was past belief. It took form, developed limbs, made repeated attempts at locomotion, and finally drew itself out of the glass receptacle of cunningly compounded liquid in which it had been created. I need to brush you. I have a handful of fur. Jesus. At that, the learned professor leaped to his feet in a transport of exultation. The impossible had been achieved. Life. Life so long the mystery and despair of man had come at his bidding. He alone of all humanity held the secret in the hollow of his hand. That's not true at all, sir. You are alive because your mother birthed you. Your mother holds the secret. Whatever. He alone of all humanity held the secret in the hollow of his hand. He plunged about unheeded down... No. I did it to myself. I don't... Did I drop my thing excited to pick up a cat? Oh no. I'm gonna lose my place. Oh, it's in the book. He alone of all humanity held the secret in the hollow of his hand. He plunged about the room in a blind ecstasy of triumph. Tears ran unknown and unheeded down his cheeks. He tossed his arms aloft wildly, as if challenging omnipotence itself. At that moment, he felt a very god. He could create worlds and people them. A burning desire seized him to rush out and proclaim the deed from the housetops, to the utter confounding of brotherly scientists and the theologians. He dropped, panting, into his chair and strove to collect and quiet his mind. Not yet the time to make known this incredible fact. He must wait until full development proved that it was indeed a living creature with animal nature and desires. It had lain quivering on the marble slab, breathing regularly and steadily, making aimless movements. The four limbs that had seemed but swaying feelers grew into long, thin arms and legs, with claw-like hands and feet, six-toed feet. No. With claw-like hands and flat six-toed feet. It lost its spherical shape, an uneven protuberance, in which was situated the breathing orifice, expanded into a head with rudimentary features. He took his spatula and turned it over. It responded to the touch with an effort to rise. The head wobbled weakly, and two slits opened in the dim face, from which looked out dull, fishy eyes. It grew. Each moment found it larger, more developed, yet he could no more see the growth than he could see the movement of the hour hand of his watch. It is probably of the simian order he made memorandum. Ape-like, grows a strange caricature of humanity. An aperture appeared in the oblong head, forming a lipless mouth below the lump of a nose. Large ears stood out on either side. The caricature-like resemblance to humanity increased as it grew older. It crawled a space, sat up, made many futile efforts, and at last succeeded in standing. It took a few staggering steps. It made wheezy, puffing sounds and its motions, and driveled idiotically. Finally, it squatted down on its haunches, the knobby knees drawn up against the rotund paunch, the hands grasping the ankles. The attitude of primitive man, the professor muttered. For long it crouched thus, increasing in size and beginning to display a crude intelligence, looking about with eyes that evidently saw, noted things, the arc of light, the glistening glass and brass, and most of all, himself. And there's an illustration, and it's strange because it kind of looks like a spider, which does not seem to be a part of the story. Also, I can't see myself, so I don't know if you can see the picture. Okay. Where did it go? There we go. Okay, hello. I see my face again. Welcome back. It had as yet made no manifestation that indicated desire, but soon a fly, alighting near it, was snatched up and thrust into its mouth with incredible quickness and an eager sucking noise. At this expression of animalism, the professor's hands shook so violently that he could scarcely record the movement. Nervousness only. He would not admit to himself a feeling of startled misgiving. He was worn out. For days, he scarcely tasted food. Damn it. He was worn out. For days, he scarcely tasted food, and he had dozed only at long intervals. A half-hour's sleep would refresh him, and the creature could not change much in that time, for its bodily development seemed nearly completed. His head dropped on his arms, and he slumbered profoundly. He was awakened by a sense of suffocation and a gnawing at his neck. He started up with a cry, pushing off a clammy mass that lay heavy on the upturned side of his face. Merciful heaven! It was the beast attacking him, its teeth, which he had not before discovered, seeking his throat. It lay where he had thrown it, its long tongue licking the shapeless mouth, its eyes hot with an awakened bloodthirstiness, and a wave of repulsion. He struck it savagely. He was appalled at what he had done. He seemed to have committed a crime in striking it. He went to the anteroom, where fresh food was left for him daily, and selected different sorts, questioning whether any would or could satisfy a creature which had been brought into existence in such a marvelous manner. It met him with alert expectancy, and ate, with a ravenous gluttony that was loathsome, of all that he put before it. Apparently, it possessed all the animal senses. All had been tested but hearing. He spoke a few words in an ordinary tone. It lifted its face with an expression of inquiry. He paced the room in perplexed thought. Could it possess mental faculties beyond those of an ordinary animal? He had not hoped to produce anything but a lower form of life. Never had he imagined a creature of his creating, with consciousness in its existence. There was a responsibility for which he was not prepared. Exhausted in body and mind, he locked the creature in the inner room and threw himself on the couch in his study for a night's rest. The creature was standing when he entered next morning, and, stepping toward him, it correctly repeated every word he had spoken the night before, as if reciting a lesson, showing an eager expectancy of approval. "Good heavens!" ejaculated the professor, reeling against the door. "Good heavens!" it echoed, its small orbs sparkling. He sprang toward it as if to force back this evidence of intelligent reason. It fled, keeping the table between them. Brought to bay, it dropped on its knees and put up beseeching hands, mumbling a prayer from its own inner consciousness. Aghast, terrified, he gazed at it, tremblingly assuring himself that many animals made imitative sounds. Parrots readily learned human speech. The curious creature had shown no bodily growth for several days. It had perhaps reached maturity and would soon show signs of decay. Already a lump had appeared on its breast, which it picked at uneasily. He must not much longer delay exhibiting it, yet he hesitated to do so until he was more certain concerning it. He tested its powers with a multitude of words that it not only easily repeated but retained perfectly, muttering them over, forming and reforming a number of proper sentences with various definitions, which it seemed to submit, in comparison, to some inner or waking intelligence. Once, after long muttering, it came to him, with timid perplexity, and put the astonishing question, "What am I?" And when he answered not for amazement, the poor creature wandered about, repeating the words. Like one rallying from long unconsciousness, it seemed seeking a dimly remembered clue to its identity. Fear clutched him. Impossible. Oh, impossible that he had a human soul imprisoned in such hideous form. A soul that would, by and by, fully awake to the wrong he had done it. No, no. He spurned the thought as a wild fancy. But even so, he had done nothing unlawful. Man was free to use his intellect to the utmost. He had brought into existence a living creature, but he was not responsible farther than the body. To the keeper of souls be the rest. Possibly some long disembodied spirit, grown wise in its freedom, animated the creature, and its full development would open a channel for such knowledge as the earth had never before known, and the world would ring with his name, and honor and fame be his. Again he exulted while making record of its mental unfoldment, which was as rapid as had been the development of its uncouth body, and with much the same distortion. It recognized him as its creator, did him reverence, and obeyed his commands. My child is being annoying. Come here. You're being annoying. Can you either come over here or go away? Shoo, 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 shoo. Okay. The lump, which he had taken for a symptom of decay, assumed the appearance of a large scale and dropped off. When he would have examined it more closely, the creature put a hand over it, looking up at him with a show of hostility and cunning, for the first time disregarding his command, and he would not enforce obedience. He was confounded next morning to find that the scale had developed into a second creature. About it the first hovered with evident joy and pride, inviting his attention to it with the gushing babble of a child. He had not imagined it possessed the power of generation, but here was reproduction with an ease and rapidity beyond any creature of like size in existence. Rapidity. Yeah. The second one, fed and taught by the first, matured in body and mind more quickly, and they invented or discovered a speech of their own, a strange jargon, of which he could make nothing, by which they exchanged thoughts and conversed, in which he tried in vain to help them reduce to a written language, through which he might obtain the wisdom for which he hoped. And reproduction went on, while he subjected them to many tests to determine their nature. As they grew in age and numbers, they began to evince him for less reverence, and an animosity appeared, that burst out again at times, and a horrible flow of invectives, a mingling of their own strange speech and his. When he did not comply with their desires, they wailed piteously, demanding why, or hurled blasphemous defiance at him. These things convinced him that they were a lower order of humanity, possessing souls, for no creature but man observed, with like or dislike, the bodily form in which its life was manifested. He was torn and racked with dread and a crushing sense of guilt and responsibility. It was as if he had started an avalanche that might overwhelm the world. Already they had become a heavy burden to him. He was obliged to make nightly visits to the markets for food to satisfy their rapacity, food which he flung to them as to so many dogs, and which they pounced upon and fought over, with curses at each other's greed. Yet at a word of reproof from him, they banded solidly against him, each for all. All complacency over his handiwork had vanished. Never could he bring himself to exhibit a mortal eye these repulsive creatures. His only thought was the unanswerable question, what should he do with them? On this he brooded continually, reaching no conclusion because he could no more contemplate destroying creatures possessing human intelligence, however distorted and degraded, than he could have taken the life of a born idiot or one insane. In his absorption, he neglected to lock the door one day, and roused to find them swarming in his study. Besides the high skylight, there was one large window, securely closed by a heavy inside shutter, above which was a long, narrow opening admitting air. Some of them, clinging to shutter and casement, and uttering low, sharp cries, like wolves scenting their prey, had climbed to the opening, and were peering out with gloating eyes. They clawed and gibbered, with hot tongues lolling eagerly, the saliva dripping from their ugly mouths, hideous pictures of unsatiated animal appetite. What was it that was so aroused their ghoulish lust? His little children playing on the lawn, their innocent voices rising like heavenly music in contrast to the... Sorry, bumped the mic. In contrast to the hellish sounds within. A rippling laugh floated on the air, and the creature's eagerness increased to a fury. With tooth and nail, they strove to enlarge the opening, not heeding his horrified commands. In a frenzy of rage, he snatched an iron rod and swept them to the floor, driving them with blows and maledictions to their room. They fled before his wrath, but when he turned his back to lock the door, they flung themselves upon him, with desperate attempts to reach his throat. After a sharp battle, he beat them off and sent them huddling and whimpering to a corner. "Monsters, monsters," he cried, pale with the discovery. "Monsters, who would prey on human flesh. What a curse I have called forth. It is of the devil." "Devil, devil, yes, devil," one muttered, a leering and malicious knowledge gleaming in its oblique eyes. In that moment he saw his duty. All hesitation vanished, and he made up his mind. They must be destroyed effectually, and he could not survive the destruction. But that occult sense or power they possessed, which was beyond anything he had ever found in man, they divined his decision almost as soon as it was formed, and prostrated themselves with cries of mercy. They hastened to lay at his feet propitiatory offerings of their belongings, cards, pencils, picture books, all that he had provided for their amusement and instruction, entreating him for life, the life that he himself had given them. Their prayers and offerings rejected, the creatures became his open enemies. Intent on escaping from their prison, his every entrance was a battle with their persistent efforts to gain control of the door, the only outlet to the room. They were not easily injured. No maiming nor bruises resulted from his hasty blows with the rod. Would it be possible to destroy them? Their bodily substance resembled clammy putty in appearance, with the consistency of rubber. He had never conquered his repugnance sufficiently to handle one. He could not experiment upon them, but the chemicals he meant to employ with the most powerful explosives... Are you on my computer, you little shithead? Oh, you're such a buttface. Come here. Come here. Come here. You come over here to scream, but you don't want to get close enough for me to pet you. You are a menace to me. Shoot, shoot. Oh god, I'm having a battle with my children the same way the main character is. Good lord. Shoot, 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 shoot. Prostrate yourself against me. Pray for me. Oh wait, no, that means that I'm gonna harm you. I'm not gonna harm you. I'm just gonna pick you up. Oh, you're fine. You're fine. You're fine. There's just a little bit of story left. Come on. Let me finish the story. Let me finish the story. Then we can sit on the couch, okay? We can sit on the couch together and you can scream in my ear. Oh, God. He had never conquered his repugnance sufficiently to handle one. He could not experiment upon them, but the chemicals he meant to employ with the most powerful explosives he trusted would make the work of annihilation swift and thorough. His preparations were delayed and hindered by their never-ending attempts to overcome him. The moment he became absorbed in his work, they crawled and crept with malignant insistence to a fresh attack. Once, in a movement of defense, he pricked the body of one with a sharpened tool, and he was almost suffocated by the fumes that arose from the yellow, viscid fluid that oozed from the wound. Escaping from the affrighted, indignant uproar that followed, he stood at his study window to recover from the dizzy sickness. That alone would make them formidable enemies to mankind, he muttered. The slaughter of a few would put to flight an army. Turned loose, they are sufficient now in numbers, with all their hellish characteristics, to lay waste this teeming city. wretched, impotent creator that I am. Could I but turn back the dial of time a few short weeks, how happily I could take my place beside the most ignorant toiler, and meddle no more with the prerogative of the Almighty. In a few hours the wound had healed, no trace of injury remaining, but they had learned new reason to fear him, and skulked about glowering, commenting upon him with shameless, insulting epithets. He found a note from his wife in his mail, informing him of the arrival in the city of a noted scientist whose coming had been largely of his arranging months before. There was much dissatisfaction expressed at his absence, and demands were made that he attend the forthcoming banquet. Of course you will go, she wrote, and dear, do come in early enough to give a little time to your family. We have hardly seen you for weeks and weeks, and though I have obeyed the law, I so long to see you that I have been tempted to transgress and boldly make my way to you. Baby, who was just beginning to totter about when you saw him last, runs easily now on his sturdy little legs, and he can say papa quite plainly. Do come, dear. A few hours with us will rest you. Rest indeed. Heaven itself could seem no sweeter to the miserable man than this glimpse of his home. His dear wife, content to live the life omnipotence had planned for her. His sweet children, daily and harmoniously unfolding new graces of mind and body like lovely flowers. Not for him was it to see their perfected maturity from which he had hoped so much. With a groan, he dropped his head and wept bitter tears. Tears that meant the God, there's more for me. The renunciation of his own forfeited life. All was complete when the banquet day arrived. He had but to press a small knob in the floor, and the mighty currents of electricity would flash around the room, setting in motion forces of such tremendous power and instantaneous action that the entire space would instantly be one flame, of an intensity that no conceivable matter could withstand. He had taken extraordinary precautions to guard the works from the curiosity and cunning of the creatures, protecting the button that controlled the whole with a metallic cover, which was held closely to the floor by screws. And now he looked upon the creatures, itemizing their hideousness, as if to prepare a paper descriptive of them for this gathering of scientific authorities. Pygmies between 3 and 4 feet in height. Is pygmies like a racist thing now? Oh no. Oh no. Immensely strong, long, thin, crooked limbs, and some of unequal length, squat, thick bodies, pointed heads, bald but for a tuft of hair at the crown, huge ears that loosely flapped, dog-like, nose, little more than wide nostrils, mouth, a mere long slit, with protruding teeth and eyes. Eyes that showed plainly far more than animal intelligence. They were small, oblique, set closely together of a beady black, their only lids being a whitish membrane that swept them at intervals, but they sparkled and glowed with passion, dimmed with tears, and widened with thoughts. Those eyes, more than a score of them, were fixed upon him now with entreaty, menace, fear, revolt, and most of all, judgment, burning in their depths. Even the smaller ones, of which there were many in various sizes, eyed him with resentment and hate, while scurrying like frightened rats from corner to corner as he moved about. Let accident put him for a moment in their power, and the whole pack would be upon him and tear him to shreds as they would any human being. Yet so strange, so monstrous was this unprecedented creation, mingling of lowest animal ferocity in human mind and soul, that he had found it quite possible to teach them to read and write, and work mathematical problems, and they were perhaps capable of considerable education, but without one redeeming trait. Earth had no place for such. Their taste for blood was appalling. Of all the food he offered, they preferred raw meat. The more gory, the better. He had provided a quantity to employ them while he was away, and left them snarling over it. He tried to put all thought of them behind him as he locked the doors, For a few hours he would be free, rid of torment and anticipation. But a deep melancholy shadowed the happiness of his reunion with his family, and gloom sat with him at the banquet table. He took no part in the festivities and discussions, and was so manifestly unfit to do so that none urged him. Only when the distinguished guest touched on the subject of the possibility, or impossibility as he viewed it, of producing life chemically, did he rouse to interest. It can never be done, asserted the guest, for the giving of the breath of life is the prerogative of the omnipotent alone. Ah, but Professor Levison believes otherwise, and hopes some day to astonish us by exhibiting a creature which he has created. But whether beast or human, we will have to wait for time to reveal, one said, with light sarcasm. And in the impossibility to determine beforehand what the creation shall be lies my objection to man's assuming the responsibility, even if he could by any means attain to it. For who could say what a calamity might be brought upon humanity in the shape of some detestable monstrosity, whose evil propensities would be beyond control? Science has a large field for research. One need not step aside to intrude where success, if possible, might mean widespread disaster. The professor shrank as from a blow, and the desire he had momentarily felt to exhibit his creation to the scoffers and prove the reality of his assumption died out in despair as he thought what an intolerable devilish curse that creation was. No, nothing remained but silence and annihilation. He wondered vaguely as to the state of himself and his creatures in that place beyond the seething crucible of fire through which they would shortly pass together. His wife was alarmed at his worn face and the dull apathy with which he spoke of the meeting, to which he had formerly looked with such eagerness. "Dear," she said pleadingly, "you are wearing yourself out. Drop everything and rest. What will all the experiments and discoveries in the world matter to us if we have not you? Come, take a vacation and let us go on our long-planned visit." "I cannot now," he said, so decisively that she felt it useless to insist. "At any rate, you can give yourself a few hours' rest. Do not go back to the laboratory tonight." "Oh, but I must," he exclaimed. Then, taking her in his arms, he added, "My dearest, I cannot stay now, but I am planning to take a long rest soon." This was for her comfort afterwards. He gazed at his sleeping children with yearning tenderness, and took leave of her with a solemn finality of manner that increased her anxiety. "It is as if he never expected to see us again," she murmured tearfully. From his study he could hear the creatures leaping, laughing, wrangling, forgetful as children of the impending fate they so clearly realized in his presence. He pitied but could not save them. And now the hour had come. All things waited the last act, but, like the condemned criminal taking leave of earth in a last lingering gaze, he longed for another farewell glimpse of the home he would enter no more. Going to the anteroom, he threw open the shutter and leaned out. How quiet the night! With what divine precision all things ran their appointed course, held and guided by omnipotence. He lifted his heart in a prayer for protection and blessing upon the silent house which contained his dear ones. How dear he had never known till this sad hour in... What was it? Had the day of doom burst in all its terrible grandeur? The earth rocked with awful thunderings. The very heavens were blotted out with belching flame. Then, suddenly, silence and darkness enveloped him. He opened his eyes and looked about with feeble efforts at thought. He was in his own bed, and surely that was his wife's dear face, bathed in happy tears, bending over him, asking, "Dear husband, are you better? Do you know me?" He nodded, smiling faintly. Then memory returned, and a stream of questions rushed from his lips. "Hush, hush," she stopped him with her soft hand. "Be quiet. I will tell you all, for I know you will not rest otherwise. There was a fearful explosion at the laboratory, so fearful that it was heard across the city. The whole building seemed to burst out at once into flame, and oh, my dearest, we feared you were in it, but a kind providence must have sent you to the outer room, for you were blown through the hall window, and you were rescued from the burning debris." She paused to control her emotion. "How long?" he asked. 3 weeks, and you have been in a raging fever till 2 days ago." "Was all destroyed?" he breathed anxiously. "Yes, dear, everything. Nothing was left but a few scraps of twisted metal, but we will not mind that when your precious life was spared. You can rebuild when you are entirely recovered. I belong to you and the children now, he murmured, in ambiguous answer, drawing her face down to his, feeling his stored life not his own. It was clear to him what had happened. The creatures had loosened the screws of the cap covering the knob and had themselves brought about their destruction. With a thankful sigh, he fell into a restful slumber. End of story. Which was... An Unscientific Story by Louise J. Strong. Interesting. I feel bad for the creatures in that. I'm probably not supposed to be, right? They're like devilish and evil with their weird mouths and their propensity for blood. But he just kind of hated them immediately on sight, right? He never like truly cared for them. And like wire mom theory or whatever, if like you are neglected emotionally or physically or whatever, you're gonna kind of grow up twisted and wrong. They were never really given a chance to not be twisted and wrong, so I feel kind of bad for them. But ultimately, they were, I mean, it's a horror story. They were probably going to eat his children, so it's fine if they died. Like me adding my own little, aw, they were just little creatures. Let them eat some children. You don't know if they're going to eat the children until they do, so just like see what happens, right? Meanwhile, they would have eaten in the entire city in like an hour. Okay. That is the last story for the night. Let me put my little bookmark in here so I don't lose my place. If you've made it all the way to the end with me, thank you so freaking much. I greatly appreciate it. I know I'm not like a professional reader, so the fact that anybody hangs out with me for that long is awesome. I do these on Sunday at 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. We read this book primarily, and we do other things for fun, and I'm going to be adding a second stream just to see what happens. Let's see how long we can keep it up, and if anyone is interested, and if I care if anyone is interested. Yeah, I will see you next week at some point. We are going to finish this book, and it's going to be great and fun, unless the story sucks like the third one. Okay. Thank you for being here. Good night. Goodbye. Bye. And